"Sir, that phone is not broken. Someone keeps hanging up before you can hear her." Vittorio De Luca stopped in the doorway of the master bedroom with his hand still wrapped around the brass handle, his black onyx ring catching a thin line of moonlight. No one entered this room after midnight. No one opened Elena's drawers. No one touched the white robe still hanging behind the dressing screen, the silver clock still frozen at 12:03, or the bottle of perfume that had not lost its sweetness after 7 years of silence. Yet there stood Grace Monroe, 8 years old, barefoot on the pale carpet, the maid's little girl with a faded yellow ribbon in her hair, holding Elena's old silver phone against her ear as if she were listening to a secret trapped under glass. Vittorio's voice came low enough to make the curtains feel still. "Put it down." Grace did not run. She did not cry. She only lowered the phone a little and looked at him with the serious face of a child who had already learned that adults often punish the truth before they understood it. "I was going to, sir," she whispered. But it rang again. Vittorio took one step inside. The room smelled of cedar drawers, cold linen, and the faint amber perfume Elena used to wear when she waited up for him after late meetings. "That phone has been dead for years." Grace shook her head once. "No, sir. Dead things do not stop after one ring." Before he could answer, the phone lit up in her hand. The cracked screen glowed blue-white, weak and sudden, like a match struck inside a sealed box. One ring sounded in the room. Not loud, not musical, just one clear, lonely ring that passed through the furniture, the walls, the stopped clock, and the part of Vittorio that had been locked longer than the door. On the screen, for less than a second, a name appeared. "My Elena." Then the light died. The call was gone. Vittorio did not move. The man who could quiet a boardroom with one glance, who could make grown men lower their voices by entering a restaurant, stood in his dead wife's bedroom with his hand half lifted and no command ready. Grace placed the phone carefully on the bedspread with both hands, as if sudden movement might frighten the truth away. Beside it, she set down a small notebook with a bent cardboard cover. "I wrote it down so I would not lie by accident." Vittorio looked at the notebook, then at the child. "Who gave you the key?" Grace pointed to the carpet beside the nightstand. A tiny brass key lay near the leg of the table. "It fell from under the clock when I was dusting yesterday. I was going to give it to Mama, but tonight the phone rang again. I thought someone might need help." The word help struck him harder than any accusation. Anger came first because anger was easier than hope. "You entered a locked room in my house because of a sound?" Grace nodded. "Because it was the same sound." "How many times?" She opened the notebook with careful fingers. The pencil marks were uneven but organized. Dates, times, one small line beside each. 3 weeks, she said. Sometimes nothing, sometimes one ring, mostly at 12:03. Vittorio's eyes moved to the silver clock. Its hands had not moved since the week Elena died, yet they pointed to the same time written again and again in a child's notebook. He wanted to say old batteries made strange sounds. He wanted to say grief could teach a house to echo. He wanted to say a little girl from the servants' wing had no right to carry his wife's name into the dark. But Grace had not said Elena. She had not known what my Elena meant. She had only listened when everyone else had learned not to hear. Somewhere beyond the closed door, the hallway floor creaked. Someone was coming. Grace looked toward the sound, then back at Vittorio. "It does not ring like a broken phone, sir," she said. "It rings like someone is being stopped." Vittorio picked up the phone with a white handkerchief and set it beside the notebook. His face hardened, not with rage now, but with a colder kind of attention. "Nobody touches this," he said. Grace swallowed. "Am I in trouble?" Vittorio looked at the dead screen, the frozen clock, and the name that should not have appeared. "That depends," he said quietly, "on who was trying to make sure I never heard it ring." The hallway floor creaked again. Then the bedroom door opened before Vittorio gave permission. Isabella De Luca stood there in a black silk robe tied neatly at the waist, her silver hair pinned back, her face already arranged into the soft expression she wore whenever Elena's name floated too close to the surface. Behind her came Marco, the old house manager, fully dressed despite the hour, his hands folded as if he had been awake and waiting. Clara Monroe appeared last, breathless from the West Hall, her cleaning gloves still tucked into one pocket, and the moment she saw Grace beside the bed, the color left her face. "Grace," she whispered, and the fear in her voice made the little girl look smaller than she had a second before. Grace took half a step toward her mother, but Vittorio lifted one hand without looking away from Isabella. "She stays." Clara stopped as if the word had become a wall. Isabella looked at the open nightstand, the silver phone resting on the white handkerchief, and the small notebook beside it. She did not ask why the phone was there. She did not ask what had happened. She looked at Grace first, and that was the first thing Vittorio noticed. "Oh, Vittorio," Isabella said gently, as if she were speaking to someone standing too close to a broken window. "She is a child, a tired child from the servants' wing. She should not be punished for wandering into grief she does not understand." Clara bowed her head at once.
"Mr. De Luca, I am sorry."
"She knows better. I told her never to come near this room. If you want us gone by morning, we will go. But please," she did not mean any disrespect. Grace's lips parted, but no words came out. She did not look afraid of Vittorio then. She looked afraid of becoming the reason her mother lost everything. Marco stepped forward just enough for the floorboard to answer under his shoe. "Sir, that phone was deactivated after Madame Elena's funeral. I remember the order. The room was sealed. The line was closed." Isabella nodded slowly. "Exactly. Old houses make old sounds. Children hear things. Then they make stories to explain them." She turned her eyes back to Grace, kind on the surface, cold underneath. Children from the servants' wing should not turn grief into games. Grace looked down at the notebook. Her small hands tightened around the edge of her sweater, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I was not playing. I was counting." Vittorio finally picked up the notebook. The cover was soft from being carried around. Inside, the pencil marks were uneven but careful. 12:03. 1 ring. 12:03. 1 ring. 12:04. 1 ring. Then again 12:03. 1 ring. Some nights had no mark. Some nights had a small dot Grace had drawn beside the time. Vittorio touched one of the dots with his thumb. "What is this?" Grace glanced at Isabella and then quickly back at the page. "That is when the green light blinked." Isabella gave a light laugh, not loud enough to be rude, but sharp enough to make Clara flinch. "A green light? In a mansion full of security panels, routers, clocks, and old wiring?" "Vittorio, this is exactly what I mean." Grace did not answer Isabella. She pointed toward the hallway. "It is at the end, near your office. It blinks after the ring. Not before." Marco looked at the carpet. Only for a second. But Grace saw it and Vittorio saw Grace seeing it. Clara put one hand over her mouth. "Baby, please." Isabella crossed the room slowly, careful and graceful, stopping before she came too close to the bed. "Grace, sweetheart, you may have frightened yourself. Perhaps you heard an alarm from the hall. Perhaps you found that old key and thought you had discovered something important. But this room is not a place for little girls to make themselves important." The words were soft, but they landed like a hand pressing down on the back of Grace's neck. Vittorio closed the notebook. "Do not speak to her like that." Isabella's face did not change, but one finger rose and touched the pearl earring on her left ear. "I am protecting you," she said. "From what?" Vittorio asked. "From letting a child's mistake tear open a wound that took years to close." Grace looked up then. "I did not know her name," she said quietly. "I only wrote the time." The room stilled. Vittorio turned the notebook back open and studied the pages again. No name. No Elena. No ghost. No story. Just time, ring, time, ring, time, ring, written by a child who had no reason to know which hour could hurt him most. He set the notebook beside the silver phone, far from Isabella's reach. "No one leaves," he said. Isabella's eyes narrowed by the smallest amount. "Vittorio, be reasonable." "I am." He looked at the frozen clock, then at the watch on his wrist. We wait until 12:03. Grace slid closer to Clara, but did not hide behind her. Isabella smiled again, almost sadly, yet her hand returned to the pearl earring as if checking that it was still there. Down the hall, beyond the closed door, something electronic gave a tiny click, too soft for most adults to notice. Grace noticed. Vittorio noticed Grace notice. And for the first time that night, the little notebook on the bed looked less like a child's mistake and more like the first witness in a house trained to stay silent. The room began to wait, but waiting did not make it quiet. It made every small sound sharper. The silver clock on Elena's nightstand stayed frozen at 12:03, but Vittorio's wristwatch moved second by second, each tick pressing against the walls like a finger against a bruise. Grace stood close to Clara, not hiding, but close enough that her mother's hand could rest lightly on her shoulder. Isabella remained near the dressing screen with her black robe falling perfectly straight, her face calm, her left pearl earring still between two fingers. Marco stood by the dresser, eyes lowered, the way servants looked when they wanted to seem invisible in a room where invisibility had become impossible. Vittorio opened Grace's notebook again and turned back to the first page. "Tell me exactly where you sit when you hear it." Grace pointed toward the closed bedroom door. "Outside, sir, near the linen closet. Mama cleans the west hall after everyone is asleep, and I sit on the floor because the chair makes noise if I move it." Clara closed her eyes for 1 second, ashamed that her child knew how to make herself small in someone else's house. Vittorio noticed, but he did not soften. "Not yet. And you can hear the phone from there?" Grace nodded. "Only because the hall is quiet. The sound comes under the door. It is not loud, but it is clear." Isabella gave a patient sigh. "Old pipes can sound clear at night, so can security relays. A child sitting alone in the dark can imagine many things." Grace looked at Vittorio, not Isabella. "I did not write it the first night. I thought it was nothing. I wrote it after it happened again." Vittorio tapped the page. "Why 12:03? Grace hesitated. "I do not know, sir. That is just when it happens." The words should have been useless. Instead, they struck something Vittorio had buried so deeply that even grief had stopped digging for it. Elena had never liked calling twice. When he worked late, she would call once at 12:03. One ring. Then she would hang up and he would call back from the car when he was safe to talk. It was not a code. It was not a secret plan. It was marriage made small and ordinary. A quiet signal that said, "I am still awake, and I still expect you home." Vittorio looked down at the notebook, and for a few seconds the letters blurred. Grace had not written Elena's name. She had not written wife. She had not written dead woman. She had only written the hour Elena once used to pull him back from the world outside. His voice came out lower. "Who told you that hour mattered?" Grace shook her head. "Nobody, sir. That is why I wrote it down." Isabella's hand dropped from her earring. Marco looked up, then quickly down again. Vittorio saw both movements. "What about the green light?" he asked. Grace turned slightly toward the hallway. "It is at the end, near Miss Isabella's office. I can see it from the floor if the hall is dark. After the ring, it blinks once." Isabella answered too quickly. "My office has a router. It blinks constantly." Grace shook her head. "No, ma'am. It blinks after the ring. Not all night." Clara whispered, "Grace, baby, be careful." Grace nodded without looking away. "I am being careful, Mama. I counted before I said it." Vittorio walked to the door and lowered his gaze to the gap near the floor. From an adult's height, the hallway showed almost nothing. From where Grace sat, the line of sight would be different. Lower, narrower, more honest. He crouched, his black suit folding at the knees, and looked through the same slit of space a child would have watched for weeks. The far end of the hall, beneath Isabella's office door, there was darkness. Then, for less than a breath, a tiny green light blinked and vanished.
Vittorio stood slowly.
Isabella's face remained composed, but her fingers searched for the pearl earring again and missed it the first time. "Marco," Vittorio said, "the west hallway camera."
Marco swallowed.
Scheduled for maintenance, sir. Since when? This week. Which day? Marco did not answer fast enough. Grace looked at the notebook, then at the old phone resting on the bed. It rings when the camera is not watching, she said softly. No one moved. The sentence did not sound like an accusation from a child. It sounded like a door unlocking somewhere inside the house. Vittorio checked his wristwatch. 12:01. 2 minutes remained. He picked up Elena's silver phone with the white handkerchief, placed it in the center of the bed, screen facing up, then set Grace's notebook beside it like a second witness. We are done guessing, he said. Isabella lifted her chin. And what do you plan to do? Vittorio looked at the frozen clock, then at the phone, then at the hallway where the green light had blinked once and disappeared. First, he said, we call the number. Then we wait for it to call us back. Mr. Harlan arrived from the East guest suite with his coat thrown over a white shirt and his glasses still low on his nose. But the moment he stepped into Elena's bedroom, sleep left his face. He saw the phone in the center of the bed, the notebook beside it, the frozen clock, Isabella near the dressing screen, Marco by the dresser, Clara holding Grace close, and Vittorio standing as still as a man listening for the floor to confess. Call this number, Vittorio said, handing him the old contact card from the phone with a handkerchief. Mr. Harlan looked once at the name, then once at Vittorio, but he asked no questions. Lawyers who served families like the De Lucas learned when silence was more useful than curiosity. He took out his cell phone, turned on speaker and dialed. Everyone listened. The room filled with 4 clean tones. Then a flat recorded voice said, "The number you have reached is not in service." Isabella exhaled gently, almost with pity. There, she said.
A sad misunderstanding.
Nothing more. Clara lowered her eyes, already bracing for the words that would send her and Grace back to the servants' wing to pack. Marco let out the smallest breath through his nose. But Grace did not look defeated. She looked at the old phone, then at Vittorio's watch. That is not how it happens, she said. Isabella's mouth tightened. Grace, sweetheart. Mr. Harlan just proved the number is dead. Grace shook her head. No, ma'am. He proved we cannot call it. Vittorio turned toward her. Say that again. Grace swallowed, but her voice stayed steady. You do not call it, sir. You wait for it. The sentence moved through the room like cold water under a door. Isabella gave a soft laugh. Vittorio, please. We are now letting a child rewrite how telephones work. Vittorio did not answer her. He looked at Mr. Harlan. Record the room. Mr. Harlan opened an audio recorder on his phone and placed it beside Elena's silver phone. Vittorio lifted Grace's notebook and set it slightly above the 2 devices, the way someone might place a witness statement beside evidence. Grace, he said, stand by your mother. Grace did as she was told at once. She pushed both hands deep into her sweater sleeves and kept them there, far away from the bed, far away from the phone, far away from any accusation someone might want to make later. The watch on Vittorio's wrist read 12:02. Nobody spoke after that. The air conditioner whispered through the vent. Somewhere behind the wall, old wood settled with a tired click. Isabella stood perfectly still, but her left hand drifted toward her pearl earring, stopped halfway, then lowered again. Vittorio watched that movement without blinking. 12:03 came quietly. For 1 second, nothing happened. Isabella inhaled as if preparing to end the whole thing with one graceful sentence. Then Elena's phone lit up. The cracked screen flashed blue-white. One ring sounded, clear and lonely, and the name appeared again. My Elena. Before Vittorio could touch it, the screen went black. At that exact instant, something inside Isabella's robe vibrated once. Not a ringtone, not an alarm song, one hard pulse against silk. Grace heard it and looked down at the floor. Clara heard it and tightened her hand on Grace's shoulder. Mr. Harlan heard it and slowly looked up from his recording phone. Vittorio turned his head toward Isabella. What was that? Isabella smiled, but the smile arrived late. A medical reminder. My doctor's office sends alerts. At 12:03? Mr. Harlan asked before he could stop himself. Isabella's eyes moved to him, and he immediately looked at his papers. Vittorio held out his hand. Your phone. You cannot be serious. I am finished being less serious than a child with a notebook. Isabella stared at him for a long second, then reached into her robe and placed her phone on the edge of the bed. The screen was locked, but a notification glowed before fading into black. Signal received. No one said the words aloud. They did not need to. Vittorio saw them. Mr. Harlan saw them. Grace saw Vittorio see them. Marco looked at the carpet as if it might open and give him somewhere else to stand. Vittorio's voice dropped until it barely crossed the bed. All personal phones on the bed. Now. Marco placed his phone down first. Mr. Harlan placed his beside it. Clara set down an old prepaid phone with a cracked plastic case, her hands trembling even though no one had asked her to prove anything. Grace had no phone. Isabella watched the small pile of devices as if one of them had betrayed her. Vittorio picked up Elena's silver phone with the handkerchief and looked not at the screen, but at the room around it. By morning, he said to Mr. Harlan, I want carrier logs, contractor names, payment trails, and every record tied to this line. Isabella's voice turned soft again. You would drag Elena's memory through paperwork because of one ring? Vittorio looked at Grace, then at the notebook, then back at his sister. No, he said, because one ring was enough for a child to know someone was being silenced. By morning, the mansion had stopped pretending it was only grieving. The dining room curtains stayed closed even though sunlight pressed against them, turning the long table into a narrow island of green lamp. Light, paper, and silence. Mr. Harlan sat at the head of the table with his laptop open, his tie crooked, his coffee untouched. Vittorio stood behind him in the same black suit, one hand resting near Elena's silver phone, which now lay inside a clear evidence pouch. Isabella sat at the far end, dressed in black again, calm enough to look innocent to anyone who had not heard her pocket answer a dead woman's call. Marco stood by the sideboard. Clara and Grace waited near the doorway until Vittorio looked at them and said, Sit. Clara hesitated because women like her were used to standing in rooms where other people made decisions about their lives. Grace touched her sleeve, and together they sat at the lower end of the table. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat. The primary carrier confirmed that the number appears inactive to normal incoming calls. Isabella gave a small, exhausted smile. Then perhaps we can finally stop frightening a child. Mr. Harlan clicked once. I said appears inactive. The smile remained on Isabella's face, but it no longer looked comfortable. On the laptop screen, a diagram opened, Elena's old number, a blocked incoming path, and a private routing layer hidden behind a company name Vittorio did not recognize. Someone made the number look dead from the outside, Mr. Harlan said. But a specific monitored source is allowed to reach the old device for one ring before the connection terminates. Grace looked down at her notebook. One ring was no longer a sound. It was a rule. Vittorio's voice was flat. Who wrote the rule? Mr. Harlan turned the laptop. A file name appeared in bold letters. Widow Protocol. Isabella folded her hands. That was created after Elena's funeral. You were not yourself, Vittorio. Strangers called the house. Reporters, opportunists, people claiming they had messages from her. I protected you. Vittorio did not look away from the screen. Who maintained it? Mr. Harlan placed a printed record on the table. A private telecommunications contractor named Paul Renner. Marco's eyes dropped. Grace saw it before anyone asked him to hide it. Paul installed my office network, Isabella said smoothly. He handled many family, security matters. Mr. Harlan placed another page beside the first, including this one, apparently. Monthly payments from I.D. Family services to North Bell Maintenance. Memo line. Maintenance for dormant line. Vittorio leaned over the paper. How long? 7 years. The number settled across the table like dust no one had cleaned because everyone had been ordered not to see it. Isabella's voice stayed gentle. Families like ours pay for privacy. You know that better than anyone. Vittorio finally looked at her, A deadline does not need monthly maintenance. No one answered. Then Grace slowly raised one hand, only halfway, as if even asking permission might be too much. Mr. De Luca? Isabella's eyes sharpened. Grace, adults are speaking. Vittorio did not turn from the paper. Let her finish. Grace pointed at the corner of the North Bell report. That little bell picture. I saw it before. Mr. Harlan tilted the page. A tiny black bell logo sat beside the company name. Grace folded her hands in her lap. 3 weeks ago, Mama was cleaning near the fireplace downstairs. Mr. Marco put a brown envelope in the fire. It had that bell on it. I remember because it looked like the bell on my school music worksheet. Marco's face lost its color. It was trash, he said quickly. Too quickly. Vittorio turned toward him. Then trash can be checked. Mr. Harlan sent a staff member to bring the ashtray from the downstairs fireplace. Isabella stood then, her chair whispering over the rug. This is absurd. Are we building evidence from a child's memory of a drawing? Grace did not defend herself. She reached into her sweater pocket and placed a folded blackened scrap on the table. Not all of it burned, she said. It fell beside the grate. I kept it because it had the same bell. Mr. Harlan opened it carefully with the end of a pen. Most of the paper had turned gray, but 2 words remained clear. St. Agnes. Mr. Harlan stopped moving. Vittorio saw the lawyer's face change. What is St. Agnes? Isabella answered before anyone else could. A medical facility. One of many. It means nothing. Vittorio looked at Elena's phone inside the evidence pouch, then at Grace. The little girl was staring at the cracked back casing, her forehead slightly wrinkled. What now? He asked. Grace swallowed. When I held it last night, sir, it sounded like paper was inside. Vittorio did not let Grace touch the phone again. That mattered, and everyone in the dining room understood why. If the next thing inside Elena's silver phone became important, Isabella would not be able to say a child had planted it, moved it, or damaged it. Mr. Harlan took the clear evidence pouch, placed it flat on the table, and photographed the cracked back casing from 3 angles with his own phone. Then he put on thin blue gloves from a small kit he kept in his legal bag and looked at Vittorio. Do you want this opened on video? Vittorio answered without looking away from Isabella. Yes. Mr. Harlan started recording. The room became smaller around the sound of plastic easing loose. Grace sat very still beside Clara, her hands folded in her lap, her yellow ribbon drooping against one shoulder. She had only said what she heard. She had not opened the phone, had not searched the room, had not pretended to know adult secrets. She had noticed the weight of paper inside an old thing everyone else called dead. The back casing came free with a soft click. First, nothing happened. Isabella's face remained calm, almost disappointed, as if she had expected the room to embarrass itself. Then Mr. Harlan tilted the phone, and a narrow strip of yellowed paper slid onto the white tablecloth. It was folded twice, thin as a dry leaf. Clara's hand moved to Grace's shoulder. Marco turned his face slightly away. Mr. Harlan did not touch the paper with his fingers. He used a plastic evidence tool to unfold it. The print was faded, but the name was still readable. Elena Romano de Luca. Under it was the place. St. Agnes. Under that was the line that made Vittorio place one hand on the edge of the table as if the floor had shifted. Admitted 6 days after funeral. Grace leaned forward just enough to see the date, then looked at the framed photograph of Elena on the far wall, where she stood smiling beside Vittorio at a charity dinner long before Grace had ever entered this house. Grace did not understand conservatorship or private routing layers or why rich people could make paper obey them. But she understood before and after. She pointed at the tag without touching it. The funeral was before this, she said. No one corrected her. No one could. Mr. Harlan turned the hospital tag toward the lamp. There is a ward code, C-17. At the sound of that code, Marco stepped back so suddenly the heel of his shoe tapped the sideboard. One small knock, not loud, not dramatic, but in a room trained to hear tiny things now, it sounded like a confession losing its balance. Isabella turned toward him first, and that was another mistake. Vittorio saw it. Grace saw it. Even Clara, who had spent years lowering her eyes in this house, saw it. Isabella spoke before Marco could. This is a forgery. A cruel one. Someone knew this family was vulnerable and planted that paper to hurt you. Vittorio's eyes stayed on the tag. Who would know to hide it inside Elena's phone? Isabella took one careful breath. A servant with access. A technician with old equipment. Anyone paid by your enemies. Grace lowered her head when she heard the word servant. Clara's fingers tightened, but Vittorio looked up then, and his voice cut through the room without rising. Do not reach for them because your own story is failing. Isabella's softness slipped for less than a second. You are letting a child lead you through ashes, old wires, and scraps of paper. No, Vittorio said. I am letting evidence stand where people have been too afraid to stand. Mr. Harlan slid the hospital tag into a separate pouch and wrote the time on the seal. If this is authentic, we can request an emergency preservation order from St. Agnes. They will have to hold records tied to C-17. Isabella gave a quiet laugh. If records exist, they will be sealed. Medical privacy is not a door you kick open because a little girl heard a noise. Vittorio looked at her for a long moment. Then we will not kick it open. We will make the door answer. Marco's hands were shaking now, barely, but enough. Vittorio turned to him. Have you seen C-17 before?
Marco swallowed. No.
Sir. Grace looked at him, then at the floor near his shoes. When Mr. Harlan said St. Agnes, you looked down, she said softly. When he said C-17, you looked at the door. Marco closed his eyes. Isabella snapped, still polite but colder now. Enough from her. Vittorio stepped between Isabella and Grace, not touching anyone, only changing the space. She has done enough, he said. Now the adults will decide whether to keep lying. The hospital tag lay sealed under the green lamp, small and fragile, but it had changed everything. The phone was no longer a memory. The ring was no longer a sound. St. Agnes was no longer two burned words from a fireplace. Somewhere beyond the gates, behind a sealed file marked C-17, Elena might not be gone at all. Vittorio did not move quickly after the hospital tag was sealed. That was what frightened Isabella most. If he had raised his voice, if he had slammed his hand on the table, if he had sent cars racing towards St. Agnes before breakfast, she would have known how to shape the chaos. But he only looked at the sealed tag, then at the old silver phone, then at Grace and Clara sitting at the end of the table as if the room might still decide they were the easiest people to blame. His voice came out calm. Mrs. Monroe and her daughter will remain in the East Wing while we review what happened. Clara's face fell before she could stop it. Grace reached for her mother's hand under the table. Isabella's shoulders relaxed by a fraction, just enough to look like sympathy. That is wise, she said. Distance will help the child understand the seriousness of what she has done. Vittorio turned his eyes to her. Yes, distance helps. 2 private security men escorted Clara and Grace down the long corridor, but they did not take them back to the servants' rooms. They opened a guest suite in the East Wing, with clean towels, bottled water, a phone on the desk, and a lock that turned from the inside. Clara stood in the doorway, confused. Are we being punished? The older guard shook his head. Mr. Harlan said, you are protected witnesses, ma'am. Grace looked at the bed, the curtains, the small writing desk, and for the first time that morning she let out a breath she had been holding since the bedroom door opened. 10 minutes later, Mr. Harlan entered with a yellow legal pad and a box of crayons borrowed from the staff break room. He did not ask Grace to solve anything. He did not ask her to accuse anyone. He set the paper on the coffee table and said, Can you draw where you sit when you hear the ring? Grace knelt on the rug. She drew the linen closet first, then Elena's bedroom door, then the long hallway, then Isabella's office at the far end. The lines were crooked. The doors were too big. The hallway bent more than it should have. But when Grace added tiny green dots under Isabella's office door and little brown marks along the baseboard, Mr. Harlan stopped writing. What are those marks? Grace tapped the baseboard in her drawing. That is where the sound feels strongest. Low down. Like when Mama plugs in the vacuum and the cord hums near the wall. By noon, a licensed security technician hired through Mr. Harlan, not Marco, was removing a narrow strip of paneling from the west hallway. Vittorio stood behind him with his arms folded. Isabella stayed nearby, quiet and composed, but she watched the technician's hands more than his face. Behind the paneling was an old signal line that did not run to the main security room. It curved along the floor, past the wall behind Elena's bedroom, and disappeared into Isabella's private office. When the cabinet behind her desk was moved, a black receiver no larger than a deck of cards blinked once every 60 seconds. The technician frowned. This is not part of your house system. Vittorio looked at Marco. The old house manager's lips parted, but no answer came. That evening, Vittorio did something colder than confrontation. He returned Elena's silver phone to the drawer, exactly where Grace had found it. He placed the silver clock above it, its hands still frozen at 12:03. Under Mr. Harlan's supervision, he installed a small recorder beneath the clock, because the room belonged to him and the evidence had to be gathered cleanly. The hallway camera, repaired and backed up to an outside server, watched the bedroom door for the first time in weeks. At 11:47 that night, Isabella entered alone. On the screen in the east wing, Grace sat beside Clara under a blanket while Vittorio and Mr. Harlan watched in silence. Isabella opened the drawer, stared at the phone, then placed a tiny black device beside the clock. She leaned close and whispered, so softly the recorder barely caught it. "Not tonight, Elena." Grace did not understand every legal word that followed, but she understood the shape of a lie bending under its own weight. Vittorio closed the laptop slowly. His face showed no victory, only the terrible patience of a man who had finally learned not to interrupt the truth. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go to St. Agnes with evidence, not fear." St. Agnes looked less like a prison than Grace expected. That made it worse. The building sat behind trimmed hedges and a clean brick driveway, with white columns at the entrance and a brass sign polished so brightly it reflected the morning sun. Conservatorship Services was written beneath the name in calm letters, the kind that made control sound like care. Grace walked between Clara and the older guard, holding her notebook against her chest. She was not there to accuse anyone. Mr. Harlan had told her that. She was there because the times she wrote down had become part of the record, and records mattered in rooms where powerful adults could no longer pretend not to hear. The hearing room was small, colder than the hallway, with a long table, a flag in one corner, a wall clock, and 3 folders stacked in front of a legal officer. Isabella was already seated near the front in a black dress, pearl earrings shining softly, her hands folded with the same sorrowful grace she had worn in Elena's bedroom. Marco sat 2 chairs behind her, looking smaller away from the mansion. Paul Renner sat beside his attorney, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. Vittorio entered last, not with noise, not with threats, but with Elena's silver phone sealed in an evidence pouch and Mr. Harlan carrying a file thick enough to make the room change before anyone spoke. Isabella rose first. "My brother is grieving," she said gently to the legal officer. "A child misunderstood an old phone, and now this family is being dragged through pain that should have been left in peace." Grace looked down. Clara's hand found hers under the table. Mr. Harlan placed the first document in front of the officer. "This is not a matter of grief. It is a matter of blocked communication from a protected adult." The officer looked over his glasses. "Proceed." One by one, the room stopped belonging to Isabella. First came the carrier log showing Elena's number appeared inactive to normal calls, but allowed 1 monitored signal to reach Vittorio's stored device. Then came the file name widow protocol. Then the monthly payments to North Bell Maintenance. Then Paul Renner's name. Then the burned scrap from the fireplace with St. Agnes still readable. Then the hospital tag marked C-17, admitted 6 days after funeral. Isabella remained still through all of it, but stillness was no longer enough. Mr. Harlan opened Grace's notebook and laid it beside the legal records. These times were written before anyone in this room told Grace Monroe what they meant. The legal officer studied the pencil marks. 12:03. One ring. 12:03. One ring. For the first time, no one called it a child's imagination. Then Mr. Harlan played the hallway camera. Isabella appeared on the screen, entering Elena's room at 11:47, opening the drawer, placing a black device beside the clock. The room listened as the recorder caught her whisper. "Not tonight, Elena." The legal officer asked to hear it again. The second time, Paul's attorney leaned toward him and whispered quickly, but Paul shook his head. He stood slowly. "I need to correct my earlier statement." Isabella turned toward him. "Paul." He did not look at her. The protocol was not created for general privacy. It was designed to let one signal through, then terminate before audio connected. Mrs. DeLuca tried to call from a monitored patient line at St. Agnes. More than once. The legal officer's pen stopped. Vittorio did not move. His eyes were fixed on Paul, but his hand had closed around the edge of the table. Isabella's voice turned thinner. Elena was not capable of making decisions. I protected this family from confusion, manipulation, and scandal. Vittorio finally stood.
No.
You protected yourself from the one woman who could contradict you. Isabella looked toward Grace without fully facing her. And we are accepting this because of a maid's daughter with a notebook? The words landed exactly where they were meant to land, but this time they did not push Grace down. Vittorio picked up the notebook and set it beside the phone, the logs, the payments, the tag, the camera image, and the recorder transcript. She kept a cleaner record than every adult you paid. Clara lowered her head, and Grace felt her mother's fingers tremble, not from fear this time, but from the shock of being defended in a room that could write things down. The legal officer turned to the St. Agnes representative. Is patient C-17 on site? The representative hesitated. Mr. Harlan slid forward the emergency preservation order. We request immediate review of her capacity to make a brief statement. The officer nodded to a nurse by the door. If she is medically cleared, bring her in. Isabella's hand moved to her left pearl earring and found nothing steady there. Vittorio looked toward the side door. Grace held her notebook tighter. For 7 years, Elena had been a name on a screen, a number in a log, a tag hidden in plastic, and a voice cut off before it could become sound. Now the room waited to see whether the woman buried in paperwork could still speak for herself. The nurse returned first, holding a clipboard against her chest. Behind her came a woman in a gray cardigan, seated in a wheelchair, with a thin blanket folded over her knees and dark hair streaked with silver. Grace had imagined a ghost because everyone in the mansion had treated Elena like one. But the woman at the door did not look unreal. She looked tired. She looked careful. She looked like someone who had spent years saving her strength for the one room where it might finally matter. The legal officer spoke gently. Mrs. Romano DeLuca, the nurse has confirmed you understand where you are and why you are here. You may make a brief statement if you choose. Elena looked past the officer, past Isabella, past the folders and the polished table, until her eyes found Vittorio. The most powerful man in the room did not step forward. He did not command anyone. He simply stood there with one hand on the table, as if the only thing keeping him upright was the sound of her breathing. Elena's voice was soft, but it reached every corner. You finally heard it. Vittorio closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, they were wet, but his voice stayed steady.
Elena.
Isabella rose halfway from her chair. She is confused. This is exactly why the conservatorship was necessary. The legal officer looked at her.
Sit down, Miss DeLuca.
Isabella sat, but her face had lost the gentle grief she had worn like a veil. Mr. Harlan lifted the sealed evidence pouch containing the silver phone. Mrs. DeLuca, do you recognize this device?
Elena nodded.
It was mine. Do you know how the hospital tag came to be hidden inside the back casing? Elena drew a slow breath. I put it there. A nurse let me hold my personal belongings for a few minutes after I woke up at St. Agnes. I knew something was wrong. I knew my calls were not going through. The back of the phone was already cracked, so I folded the tag and slipped it inside. I hoped that if Vittorio ever found the phone, he would see the date. Grace looked at Clara. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth, not to stop a sob, but to hold herself together in a room where her daughter had been called a liar. Elena turned toward Grace. "You were the one who heard it?" Grace nodded, clutching the notebook. "Only one ring, ma'am." Elena's eyes softened. "One ring was all I had left." Paul Renner gave his statement next, confirming the routing layer, the one-ring termination, and the payments from Isabella's account. Marco signed a written statement after him, admitting he had forwarded invoices, sealed rooms, and discouraged staff from asking questions because he was afraid of losing everything. He placed his house keys on the table and did not ask to be excused. The legal officer suspended the conservatorship on the record, ordered St. Agnes to turn over Elena's files for independent review, and referred the payment. Records, communication blocks, and false filings for legal investigation. Isabella did not cry. She did not beg. She only sat very still as the system she had used to silence Elena began writing her name into evidence. Then Vittorio did something Grace did not expect. Before he crossed the room to Elena, he turned to Clara and her daughter. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, and the formal respect made Clara look up. "Your daughter did not steal from my family. She protected what my family abandoned. And you did not raise a dishonest child. You raised a brave one." He placed a signed document on the table. It was not hush money. It was back pay for extra hours, secure housing for 1 year, independent legal support, and a scholarship for Grace held outside the De Luca family so no one could ever use it to control her. "This apology," Vittorio said, "is part of the record." Grace looked down at her notebook. For the first time, it did not feel heavy. Elena asked for the phone. Mr. Harlan removed it from the pouch and placed it in her hands. Her fingers remembered it slowly. She opened the drafts folder and showed Vittorio one unsent message saved years before. "If I ring once, it means I am alive." Vittorio covered his mouth with one hand, but no sound came out. Elena dialed his number. Across the table, his phone began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. No system cut it off. No pocket answered in secret. No adult called it imagination. Vittorio answered while looking directly at his wife. "I hear you," he said. Grace leaned against her mother in the quiet that followed. The sound that had once been trapped inside walls had crossed a mansion, a notebook, a phone line, a hearing room, and 7 years of silence. This time, when the call connected, everyone heard the truth stay alive. "Sir, if you swallow that, they win." The whisper was so small it should have disappeared beneath the silverware, but it reached Cesare Romano at the exact second his spoon stopped an inch from his mouth. 5 seconds earlier, the dining room had looked perfect enough to hide any sin. The long walnut table shone under warm chandelier light. Crystal glasses stood in straight lines. Black linen napkins were folded beside white porcelain bowls. At the far end, beneath the oil portrait of his father, Cesare sat in a tailored black suit with his gold signet ring resting against the stem of his water glass. Silvio had rung the old silver bell at exactly 7 in the evening, the same bell that had called the Romano family to dinner for decades. Every person at the table had turned toward the sound. Every person except Cesare. Valentina Moretti noticed first, because Valentina always noticed the moment she could turn weakness into concern. She placed one elegant hand on his sleeve and smiled with a softness that looked like love from across the room. "Your hearing is getting worse tonight, darling," she said, louder than the table required. Dr. Bellini lowered his glass and nodded with the calm expression of a man whose explanation had already been written before the problem appeared. Luca, the private chef, stood beside the serving cart in a spotless white jacket, his eyes respectfully lowered. Naomi Carter stood near the service door with folded napkins over one arm, trying to make herself invisible in the way staff learned to do in houses where rich people called silence professionalism. Her 8-year-old daughter, Ellie, stood half behind her, a chipped blue hair clip above one ear and a small notebook pressed to her chest. Ellie was not watching the chandelier, the portraits, or the adults who carried power like perfume. She was watching the soup. It was pale and smooth, served in a white porcelain bowl on a black linen square. A single basil leaf floated near the rim, placed so neatly it looked decorative, almost innocent. But beneath the leaf was a faint powdery line, thin enough for an adult to miss and strange enough for a child to remember. Ellie had seen the same pale dust on her mother's white handkerchief after Naomi wiped the serving tray. Valentina leaned closer to Cesare. Dr. Bellini said this was prepared exactly as instructed. Please eat before it gets cold. Cesare lifted the spoon. Ellie saw Luca press his thumb against the seam of his sleeve. She saw Valentina's smile hold too still. She saw Naomi lower her eyes, already afraid of a mistake no one had named yet. Then Ellie moved. Naomi whispered, "Ellie," but the girl had already stepped out from behind her mother. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked to the head of the table, placed the white handkerchief beside Cesare's cuff, rose onto her toes, covered her mouth with one small hand, and whispered near his shoulder, "You are not going deaf, sir. They are drugging you." The spoon stopped in the air. No chair moved. No glass touched the table. Valentina's smile stayed on her face, but the water in her glass trembled. Cesare did not look at Ellie first. He looked at the handkerchief. On the white cloth was a thin powdery streak, almost too faint to matter. Then he looked at his bowl. The same pale dust clung to the rim beneath the basil leaf, where the soup had not swallowed it. Ellie spoke again, softer but steadier. "If it is medicine, sir, why is it hiding under the leaf?" Dr. Bellini opened his mouth, but Cesare raised one finger without turning toward him. The room obeyed. For 3 long seconds, the most powerful man at that table stared at a mark so small most adults would have wiped it away. He did not believe the child. Not yet. But he lowered the spoon until it touched the porcelain with a quiet sound that made Naomi close her eyes. Then Cesare placed both hands flat on the table and said, "No one touches this bowl." Valentina was the first to recover, and she did it so gently that the room almost followed her back into the lie. She did not look at the bowl. She did not ask Luca what had touched the soup. She gave a small, wounded laugh, the kind powerful people use when they want everyone else to decide a child has gone too far. "Cesare," she said, turning her concern toward him like a candle, "please do not let this upset you. She is only a little girl." She saw something she did not understand and used words that do not belong at this table. Naomi stepped forward so quickly the folded napkins shifted in her arms. "Mr. Romano, I am sorry," she whispered. Ellie did not mean to interrupt. Ellie looked up at her mother, not angry, only still. It was the stillness of a child learning that truth could be punished if it came from the wrong side of a room. Cesare did not answer at once. His hands remained flat on the table, one near the untouched bowl, the other near the white handkerchief. The pale streak on the cloth looked smaller now beneath the chandelier, almost easy to dismiss, and that made it more dangerous. Valentina's smile thinned. "Naomi, take your daughter out. Family medical matters are not for staff children." The words were polished, but they landed like a door closing. Naomi lowered her eyes because people who cleaned silver, carried laundry, and waited behind service doors learned early that survival sometimes meant becoming smaller than the insult. "Yes, Miss Moretti," she said. Ellie did not move until Naomi's hand touched her shoulder. Dr. Bellini opened the leather folder beside his plate with calm, practiced hands. "Mr. Romano," he said, "this is exactly why I recommended limiting stress at dinner. Your recent hearing issues are consistent with age, fatigue, and pressure. A child's misunderstanding should not become a household crisis." He slid a single sheet across the table. It was too thin for a man whose health had become the reason everyone was speaking louder. Cesare glanced at it without picking it up. "Where are the original laboratory results?" Bellini's smile stayed polite. "The relevant findings are summarized there." "That is not what I asked." A small pause moved through the room. Valentina reached toward the paper and placed 2 fingers over the lower corner, almost casually. Ellie saw the movement from beside her mother. She could not read every line, but she saw enough before Valentina covered it. Auditory decline, proxy discussion recommended. Ellie did not know what proxy meant. She only knew it sounded too important to hide under a doctor's thumb. Luca cleared his throat beside the serving cart. Sir, if I may, some imported seasoning blends can leave a light residue when added at the end. The young miss may have seen me finishing the dish and misunderstood. Cesare turned his eyes toward him. Only my dish? Luca bowed his head lower. Your meal follows Dr. Bellini's routine, sir. It is prepared separately for your health. Ellie's fingers tightened around the edge of her notebook. She wanted to say the powder had not fallen like seasoning. She wanted to say Luca had looked over his shoulder before touching the bowl. But Naomi's hand stayed on her shoulder, and that hand carried rent, groceries, school shoes, and every Friday paycheck. Cesare looked again at the handkerchief. Naomi reached for it out of habit. Sir, I can wash that. No, Cesare said. Naomi stopped. He folded the cloth once, carefully, and placed it beside the untouched bowl. This stays. Valentina's eyes flicked to the cloth. It came from the service tray. It could have touched anything. Cesare looked at her fully. A child may be wrong. A stain does not know how to lie. No one answered. Naomi guided Ellie toward the side door. But as they passed the serving cart, Ellie saw Luca turn the silver spice box with 2 fingers. The tiny lock that had faced the room now faced the wall. It was such a small movement that an adult would have called it nothing. Ellie looked back once at Cesare, who had not moved from the head of the table. Mama, she whispered, barely loud enough for the hallway to hear. He is hiding the lock now. Cesare did not turn his head, but his fingers stopped on the folded white cloth. The service hallway outside the Romano dining room felt colder than the room Ellie had just left, even though the kitchen ovens were only a few yards away. Naomi closed the door with one hand and kept the other on Ellie's shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to remind her that this house was not built for children who spoke before powerful adults were ready to listen. For a moment, neither of them moved. Through the wood, they could hear Valentina's voice, soft and polished, saying something about privacy, stress, and how frightening children could become when they misunderstood adult matters. Naomi bent down until her face was level with Ellie's. Baby, seeing something is not the same as proving it, she whispered. Ellie looked at the folded napkins still balanced over her mother's arm. One corner was trembling. I know, Ellie said. That is why I wrote it down. Naomi's eyes shifted to the small notebook pressed against Ellie's chest. It had a bent cardboard cover, pencil smudges along the corners, and a school sticker half peeled from the front. Ellie opened it carefully, as if the cheap little notebook had suddenly become something official. On the page was a drawing of the dining table from above. One long rectangle, small circles for bowls, squares for folded napkins, and an arrow pointing to the head seat where Cesare sat. Under that bowl, Ellie had drawn one tiny black dot. Naomi stared at it. What is that? Ellie lowered her voice. The mark. Naomi did not answer. Ellie turned the pencil in her fingers and continued, making sure not to add anything she had not truly seen. Before dinner, when you told me to wait by the pantry, Mr. Luca came in. All the bowls were upside down on the sideboard. He picked up one bowl, only one, and touched the bottom with something dark, like wax from the black candles. She tapped the dot on the page. Then he put that bowl at Mr. Romano's seat. Naomi pressed her lips together, and Ellie saw the fear in her mother's face change into something heavier. Recognition. Are you sure it was the same bowl? Naomi asked. Ellie nodded. It had a tiny chip under the rim, not where people see. Underneath. She flipped to the next page. There was the serving cart, drawn with uneven wheels, the silver spice box, and a small square for the lock. The box was facing this way before, Ellie said, pointing. After I talked, Mr. Luca turned it so the lock faced the wall. A quiet voice came from the pantry doorway. Show me appeared from the walls. Naomi straightened at once. Mr. Silvio, I am sorry. She is frightened. She is only trying to explain. Silvio did not look angry. He looked tired, in the way old houses make loyal men tired. I asked to see the page. Ellie held the notebook closer to herself for 1 second. Silvio noticed and lowered his hand. "You hold it," he said. "I will look from here." That made Ellie trust him just enough to turn the page outward. Silvio studied the drawing. His eyes moved without a fresh bowl, and that empty-handed return became louder than any accusation. Cesare noticed first. Valentina noticed second. Luca noticed last, but his eyes moved to the serving cart before he could stop them. In the Romano house, even silence had rank, and everyone at that table understood that the house manager did not return from the service hallway empty-handed unless the message was not meant to be carried, only delivered. Cesare looked down at the bowl in front of him, at the basil leaf still hiding part of the pale residue, at the folded white handkerchief beside his cuff, and at the black linen square beneath the porcelain. Then he turned the bowl a quarter inch with 2 fingers. Luca watched the movement as if the bowl had become a locked door. Cesare lifted his eyes to Valentina. "Exchange bowls with me." The room stopped pretending all at once. Valentina gave a quiet laugh, smaller than before, and so thin it almost broke before it reached the end of the table. "Cesare, please, linen beneath every other bowl." She tugged gently on Naomi's sleeve. "Mama," she whispered. "His bowl has the black cloth too." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second, as if every true sentence from her child moved them closer to losing the roof over their heads. Silvio heard it. He did not turn, but his shoulders shifted in a way Cesare caught at once. "Bring the child back," Cesare said. Valentina's chair scraped sharply against the floor.
No.
"She has done enough." Cesare finally looked at her fully. "I did not ask what she has done." Naomi entered slowly with Ellie at her side. Ellie did not walk into the center of the room. She stayed near the service door, where children of staff were expected to stand if they were allowed to stand at all. Cesare pointed toward the table. "Tell me only what you see." Ellie swallowed. Her eyes moved from bowl to bowl, napkin to napkin. "Your bowl is on black cloth. The others are on white." Dr. Bellini sighed softly. "A decorative choice." Ellie looked at Luca, not accusing, only remembering. "Then why did Mr. Luca put the marked bowl on the black one?" Luca's face stayed respectful, but his eyes moved toward Valentina before he could stop them. It lasted less than a second. It was enough. Cesare saw it. Silvio saw it. Ellie saw it too, and her pencil hand tightened around the notebook cover. Valentina reached for her phone as if the conversation had become tedious, but the screen lit before her palm covered it. The silver knife beside her plate caught the reflection in a thin, bright line. Ellie could not read the whole message backward, but 2 words appeared clearly enough to make her breath catch. "Marked bowl." Silvio's gaze dropped to the knife, then lifted to Cesare. Valentina turned the phone face down. "This is ridiculous," she said, but the words sounded late. Cesare placed both hands flat on the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "No one clears the table. No one touches the food. No one touches the serving cart. And from this moment forward, no one speaks for me." The silence that followed was not obedience yet. It was fear deciding where to stand. Then Cesare looked at Silvio and said, "Show me the kitchen." Silvio crossed to the walnut cabinet beside the wine wall and pressed 2 hidden buttons beneath the carved edge. A narrow screen rose from the panel, and its blue light spread across the polished table like cold water. No one leaned closer at first. In the Romano house, screens did not blink awake unless something private was about to become permanent. Valentina folded her hands in her lap, her face smooth again, her voice almost tender. "Cesare, this will only embarrass the staff. The child has already frightened her mother enough." Naomi stood near the service doorway with one hand resting lightly on Ellie's shoulder. Ellie did not look at Valentina. She looked at the screen. Silvio entered the time from earlier that evening and opened the kitchen camera. The image appeared in black and white. Luca stood alone at the stainless steel counter with 6 bowls arranged in a line. The kitchen looked clean, quiet, almost peaceful. The kind of room wealthy families like to imagine produced only elegance. Luca lifted one bowl, turned it upside down, and pressed something small against the bottom. Silvio paused the video. The black mark was there, no bigger than the head of a pencil. Ellie's fingers tightened around her notebook, but she did not smile. Being right did not feel good when her mother was standing beside her afraid. "Continue," Cesare said. The video moved again. Luca placed the marked bowl on a black linen square while the other bowls sat on white. Then he opened the silver spice box, not from the top where the seasonings were, but from a hidden lower tray. He removed a tiny glass vial with no label. Naomi made a small sound and covered it with her hand. Luca tilted the vial over the marked bowl. A pale dust fell into the soup. Then the screen flickered. The timestamp jumped. 17 seconds disappeared. When the picture returned, Valentina stood beside Luca in the kitchen. One white glove on her hand, her posture calm, the vial no longer visible. The silence at the table changed. Before, the room had been asking whether Ellie might be wrong. Now it was asking what those missing 17 seconds had protected. Dr. Bellini cleared his throat. Camera systems skip. It happens in large homes with older wiring. At most, this shows a kitchen procedure that should have been better documented. Cesare turned his head when they had nothing to fear. She touched Naomi's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, the doctor is making a paper disappear." Cesare heard enough. His eyes moved from the frozen kitchen image to Bellini's wet fingertips beside the glass, and the first proof became something larger and darker. If Luca had marked the bowl, if Valentina had known the words marked bowl, and if Bellini was hiding a page, then the secret was no longer only in the soup. Dr. Elaine Porter arrived at the Romano estate just before midnight in a gray wool coat, carrying a plain black medical case that looked too ordinary for a house full of secrets. She did not greet Valentina like family. She did not ask Dr. Bellini for permission. She stepped into the dining room, looked at the sealed bowl, the spoon, the black napkin, the white handkerchief, the silver spice box, and the tiny glass vial, then said, "I will speak only from evidence, and I will speak first to the patient." That single sentence made Dr. Bellini's face tighten more than any accusation had. The candles had burned low, leaving long shadows against the walnut walls. Ellie sat beside Naomi on a small bench near the service door, her notebook closed on her knees, her chipped blue hair clipped crooked from the long night. She was tired, but every time an adult touched a folder, her eyes opened wider. Dr. Porter marked each sample with the time, sealed each label, and used small test strips from her kit on the powder from the bowl, the cloth, and the vial. She did not use frightening words. She did not make the room louder. She only looked at Cesare and said, "This substance does not belong in food." Naomi covered her mouth with one hand. Cesare did not move. "What can it do?" he asked. Dr. Porter met his eyes, not Valentina's, not Bellini's, not the table's. With repeated exposure, it could temporarily interfere with hearing and balance. It could also make a person seem distracted, slower to respond, or uncertain during conversation. "I need a full laboratory report before I say more," but the same unusual residue appears on his bowl, on the cloth, and in the vial. Valentina breathed out through her nose, almost softly, enough to sound patient. "So you are not certain?" Dr. Porter turned one page in her notes. "I am certain it should not have been in his dinner." The words sat in the room like a locked door. Cesare looked from the sealed handkerchief to the leather medical folder Bellini had brought earlier. "Where is page 5 of my last report?" Bellini adjusted his cuff. "The summary includes the relevant findings. Where is page 5?
Cesare repeated.
Before Bellini could answer, Silvio returned from the West office with a cream-colored envelope held flat between both hands. He placed it on the table as carefully as if it were breakable. "This was in Dr. Bellini's locked drawer, sir." Cesare opened it. The top page read Temporary Medical Authority. Valentina's signature waited on the second page, neat and confident, as if she had signed it in a quiet room where no servant, no child, and no inconvenient truth could interrupt her. The document did not say poison. It did not say theft. It said concern. It said stability. It said temporary representation. It was more frightening because it sounded legal. Dr. Porter read the first page and set it down. If a physician supported a claim that you could not follow discussions or make clear decisions, this could allow someone else to speak for you. Cesari's face lost color slowly, not because he feared the powder, because he understood the design. Every repeated question, every separate meal, every evening Valentina answered for him before another person could repeat what he missed. Ellie lifted her head. A memory came back from 3 days earlier, when she had been outside the breakfast room tying her shoelace. Valentina's voice had floated around the corner, low and sharp. Ellie had not understood it then. Now she understood enough to repeat it. She said something, Ellie whispered. Naomi's hand moved toward her shoulder, but this time it did not stop her. Ellie looked only at Cesare. She said, he does not need to die. He only needs to sound broken. Valentina went perfectly still. Cesare closed his hand over the papers, and his gold ring pressed a crescent into the cream page. They were not stealing my hearing, he said. They were stealing my voice. Silvio placed one more folder beside the envelope. Inside was the agenda for the board meeting scheduled for 9 in the morning, with a resolution tied to the East Harbor contracts and a company connected to the Moretti family. Cesare looked at the clock above the fireplace. 7 hours remained before Valentina expected him to sit in that same room and let her speak for him. Cesare did not cancel the meeting scheduled for 9 in the morning. That was the first thing that made Valentina comfortable, and the first thing that told Silvio the trap was working. A man who shouted would have warned her. A man who accused too early would have given her time to clean the room, delete the message, blame the kitchen, and turn every frightened servant into a liar. So Cesare did something harder than anger. He became quiet in the exact way Valentina expected a fading man to be quiet. When she stepped beside him near the fireplace and asked, "Do you want me to handle the board in the morning, darling?" He let his eyes drift past her shoulder and answered 1 second too late. "I did not catch that." Relief softened her face before she remembered to hide it. "I said I can help you," she repeated louder. Cesare nodded once. Not agreement, not surrender, just enough rope for her to keep speaking. Across the room, Silvio wrote down the time. Dr. Porter left through the side entrance with the sealed samples, promising that her preliminary report would be sent to Cesari's attorney before sunrise, and that the full laboratory analysis would follow through a proper chain of custody. Dr. Bellini watched her leave as if the door had taken part of his safety with it. In the laundry room, Ellie sat beside Naomi beneath the humming fluorescent light, her small notebook open on her knees. Naomi had told her not to guess, only to write what she truly remembered. Ellie obeyed. Monday, eggs only for Mr. Romano. Wednesday, lemon tea in the blue cup. Friday, soup on black cloth. Under each line, she drew small circles for meals and a tiny ear beside the days Cesare had asked people to repeat themselves. It was not an investigation. It was a child sorting what she had seen into shapes she could understand. Upstairs, Cesare allowed Valentina to stand beside him during a short call with a board member. When the man asked about the East Harbor contracts, Cesare looked toward the window and said, "Say that again." Valentina touched his arm and spoke into the phone before the other man could repeat himself. Cesare agrees the family needs temporary representation until Dr. Bellini clears him. Cesare did not correct her. Silvio, standing in the hallway with a tablet held flat against his folder, recorded the call log, the exact time, and her exact words. In the West office, Cesari's attorney worked through invoices sent from the kitchen. One receipt looked harmless at first. Culinary mineral sample, rush delivery, 6 small units. But the billing address was not the kitchen. It was Bellini's private clinic in Newark, 32 miles away. The delivery dates matched 3 of Ellie's circles. The pharmacy log matched 2. Luca's signature appeared beside the locked cabinet where Bellini stored medical supplies. Once on Monday, once on Wednesday, once on Friday. A chef had no reason to sign that page. Not once. Not 3 times. When Silvio laid the copies in front of Cesare, the old man did not smile. He placed them beside the handkerchief, the lab slip, the video still, the temporary medical authority papers, and Ellie's notebook. The evidence no longer looked like pieces. It looked like a road. Near dawn, Naomi finally spoke. She stood in the laundry room folding the same towel again and again, not noticing that it was already perfect. "Mr. Romano," she said when Cesare entered the service corridor. "3 weeks ago, I saw that little glass bottle in Mr. Luca's coat pocket." Her voice was thin, but it did not break. The next morning, Miss Moretti said a silver spoon was missing from the main dining set. She asked me in front of the staff if I needed money that badly. Ellie stopped writing. Cesare turned toward Naomi slowly. "Did you take it?" Naomi lifted her eyes. "No, sir." 2 words, quiet and worn down by 3 weeks of swallowed shame. Cesare looked at her work shoes, the notebook in Ellie's lap, and the hallway where staff walked softly so powerful people would not have to notice them. "Why did you not tell me?" Naomi pressed the towel flat with both hands. "Because people like me can lose a job even when we are telling the truth." Something in Cesari's face changed then. Not pity, something colder and more honest. He turned to Silvio. "Find the spoon." At 7:16 in the morning, Silvio returned with the silver spice box. In the lower locked compartment, beneath the removable tray, lay the missing Romano spoon wrapped in one white glove. The family mark shone under the pantry light. Naomi stared at it as if a small piece of silver had been holding her breath for 3 weeks. Cesare did not touch it. "Seal it," he said. Ellie looked up. "For the meeting?" Cesare nodded, his voice clear enough for every person in the corridor to hear. "Yes, she tried to use that room to take my voice. We will use the same room to give yours back." At 9 in the morning, the Romano dining room looked ready for business, but it no longer looked innocent. The walnut table had been polished until the chandelier reflected across it like still water. Leather folders sat in neat rows where dinner plates had been hours earlier. The old silver bell rested beneath the portrait of Cesari's father, quiet now, as if even the house was waiting to hear who would be allowed to speak. At the head of the table, Silvio had arranged the sealed evidence bags beside Cesari's chair. The soup bowl, the spoon, the black napkin, the white handkerchief, the tiny glass vial, the silver spice box, the missing Romano spoon, and Ellie's small notebook. Naomi stood with Ellie near the service doorway, not inside the circle, not fully outside it either. Ellie held her mother's hand and kept her eyes on the table because important things in that house had a way of hiding in plain sight. Valentina entered in a cream suit, calm enough to make control look like kindness. Dr. Bellini followed with his folder under one arm, and Luca stood near the wall in a clean chef's coat that made him look more like a witness than a cook. The board members took their seats. The family attorney opened his laptop. Valentina placed the temporary medical authority papers in front of him with both hands, as if she were offering something painful but necessary. "This is not easy," she said softly. Cesare has been struggling to follow conversations, especially under pressure. For the stability of the family and the East Harbor contracts, Dr. Bellini and I believe temporary representation is the safest choice. Bellini lowered his chin with professional sympathy. "My recommendation is protective. Until Mr. Romano's auditory and cognitive responses improve, major decisions should be supported by someone he trusts." A board member looked toward Cesare. "Mr. Romano, is that your wish?" Cesare lowered his eyes to the papers. He let the silence stretch just long enough for Valentina to mistake it for weakness. She leaned forward before the question could be repeated. "He agrees," she said. "He simply cannot hear all of this clearly today." Cesare removed the gold signet ring from his finger and placed it on top of the proxy papers. The small sound of metal on paper cut through the room sharper than any raised voice. Then he looked directly at Valentina. "I heard you better when you thought I was broken." No one moved. Bellini's polite expression disappeared first. Luca looked down at the floor. Valentina kept smiling, but now the smile had nothing left underneath it. Cesare nodded once to Silvio. One by one, Silvio laid out the chain in front of the attorney. Dr. Porter's preliminary report matched the unusual residue on the bowl, the handkerchief, and the vial. The kitchen video showed Luca marking the bowl, placing it on the black napkin, opening the hidden lower tray of the silver spice box, and using the unlabeled vial. The timestamp showed the missing 17 seconds. The oven reflection showed Valentina entering with her phone, and the earlier knife reflection showed the words marked bowl. The invoice for culinary mineral sample had been paid by Bellini's private clinic in Newark. The pharmacy log showed Luca's signature on 3 dates that matched Ellie's notebook. The missing page 5 connected Bellini's medical summary to the temporary medical authority. The East Harbor resolution connected Valentina's proposed control to a company tied to the Moretti family. Ellie did not interrupt. When Silvio needed her notebook, she stepped only close enough to place it on a tray, then moved back beside Naomi. "The black dot is where his bowl was," she whispered. The attorney photographed the page. Valentina's voice changed for the first time. "This is a performance. A maid accused of stealing silver and her child's drawings are not evidence." Naomi's hand tightened around Ellie's, but she did not lower her head. Cesare looked at Silvio. Silvio held up the sealed evidence bag containing the silver spoon. "Found in the locked compartment of the silver spice box," he said, "wrapped in a white glove from Miss Moretti's private service set." The room turned toward Naomi, and this time the silence did not accuse her.
Cesare stood slowly.
"In this house, the truth will not be punished because it came from the servant's side of the door." He turned to the attorney. "Record everything. The proxy is rejected. The East Harbor vote is suspended. Dr. Bellini is removed from my medical file. These documents go to the proper authorities, the medical board, and corporate counsel before noon." Valentina whispered, "Cesare, you are making a mistake." He looked from the sealed handkerchief to Ellie standing beside her mother. "No," he said. "My mistake was needing a child to remind me how to listen." By noon, the Romano dining room no longer belonged to the lie that had been polished there for months. The temporary medical authority papers were stamped disputed by corporate counsel. The East Harbor resolution was suspended before a single signature could move control away from Cesare, and every item from the head of the table was logged into the official record with time, date, and witness initials. The soup bowl, the spoon, the black napkin, the original white handkerchief, the tiny glass vial, the silver spice box, the missing Romano spoon, Ellie's notebook, Dr. Porter's preliminary report, the kitchen footage, the Newark invoice, the pharmacy log, and Bellini's incomplete medical file were no longer whispers in a hallway. They were evidence. Valentina left the room with legal counsel beside her. Not because Cesare shouted, and not because anyone needed to make a scene, but because the documents had finally become louder than her voice. Dr. Bellini was removed from every medical decision connected to Cesare and reported to the medical board. Luca was suspended from the estate staff and taken to a side office with an attorney present, where the only useful thing left for him was the truth in the right order. Cesare stayed at the head of the table after the board members stood to leave. He looked tired but not weak. There was a difference, and everyone in the house could feel it now. Naomi remained near the service doorway with Ellie beside her, still standing in the place where staff waited to be dismissed. Cesare saw that too. He picked up the sealed evidence bag containing the silver spoon and held it where the remaining family, staff, and attorneys could see the engraved Romano mark. 3 weeks ago, he said, Naomi Carter was accused in this house of stealing from this family. That accusation was false. Naomi's eyes dropped out of habit, but Ellie held her hand and did not let go. Cesare continued, the spoon was found inside the locked compartment of the same spice box used to hide evidence. It was placed there to make a loyal employee afraid to speak. The room turned toward Naomi, and this time the silence did not shame her. It made room for her. Cesare faced her fully. Miss Carter, this house owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked hard. She did not collapse. She did not beg. She stood straighter, as if someone had returned an invisible piece of her name. Thank you, Mr. Romano, she said, and her voice stayed clear. Before the day ended, a new staff protection policy was written into the estate records. Naomi received back pay for the shifts and benefits affected by the false accusation, written protection from retaliation, access to an outside reporting line, and paid legal support if anyone threatened her work because she told the truth. Cesare also asked Naomi, not Ellie, whether educational support for her daughter would be acceptable if handled privately through counsel. Naomi looked at Ellie first. Ellie nodded once, only after her mother did. Then it will be done properly, Cesare said. The original white handkerchief remained sealed in the evidence file, while a clean duplicate was pressed and placed in a simple frame in the staff corridor. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "The first evidence was held by the person no one wanted to hear." Ellie stood in front of it with her chipped blue hair clip still crooked above one ear. Cesare came beside her slowly, his gold signet ring back on his hand. Ellie looked at the ring, then at the framed cloth. "You can keep it, sir," she said. "Just do not let it make you stop listening." Cesare lowered himself to one knee so he did not tower over her. "You did not save my ears, Ellie," he said. "You saved my right to choose." That evening, Silvio rang the old silver bell for dinner. The sound traveled through the hallway, small, clear, and ordinary. Cesare turned his head immediately, but what mattered was where he looked first. Not at Valentina's empty chair, not at the polished silver. He looked toward the service doorway, where Naomi Carter and her daughter stood together, no longer hidden behind it. The smallest person in the room had not only been heard. She had changed the rules of the house.